"Your mother doesn't want to be here anymore," the nurse said quietly, setting down the medication tray. The words hung in the air like poison gas. I stood frozen in the doorway of my mother's hospice room, my hand still reaching for the light switch. The fluorescent panels hummed overhead, casting everything in that sickly institutional white that made dying feel like an administrative process. My chest went tight. I couldn't breathe properly. The hallway behind me seemed to stretch into darkness, pulling away, leaving me alone with what I'd just heard. "What do you mean?" I managed, though I already understood. The implication was there, hanging between us like a blade. The nurse, Patricia, a woman I'd come to know over these past 6 weeks as one of the few genuinely kind people in this building, glanced toward my mother's bed, where Margaret Gibson lay propped against pillows, her breathing shallow and irregular. Her eyes were closed. She'd been awake an hour ago. She'd asked me to read her the newspaper. She'd smiled when I told her about my garden. Now she looked impossibly small, like something that had been slowly erased. "She's mentioned it several times," Patricia continued, lowering her voice even further. "About wanting to go, about not wanting to fight anymore. I just wanted you to know that she's expressed this clearly. It's important to document these wishes." I reached for the wall to steady myself. The cool, painted surface felt real in a way nothing else did right now. My fingers pressed against it, needing something solid, something that wouldn't betray me with hidden conversations and coded language. Patricia was being professional. That was clear. She was doing her job, documenting end-of-life preferences. But something in her careful phrasing, something in the way she'd chosen to tell me this, alone, in the hallway, not in front of my mother, told me there was more to this story. "Did she say this to you?" I asked. "Or did someone else tell you she said it?" Patricia's expression shifted, just slightly, just enough for me to see that I'd touched on something true. She straightened the medication tray in her hands, a small gesture that meant she was choosing her words carefully now. "Your sons have been very concerned about her comfort level," she said. "They've been very involved in conversations about what she wants." My sons, both of them. Callum, my oldest, who'd moved to the city 5 years ago and rarely visited, and Derek, who'd always been closer to me, who'd helped me move my mother into this place, who'd sat with me through the first terrifying nights when she couldn't remember where she was or who I was. Both of them had been here recently, multiple times, more times than I'd realized. "What exactly did they tell you?" The words came out harder than I intended. Patricia set down the tray on the small table by the window. "She was a professional, and professionals maintain boundaries, but she was also human, and humans sometimes recognize when something isn't right, when something needs to be said despite the rules about staying neutral and not getting involved in family dynamics. They said your mother had expressed that she didn't want to continue treatment, that she wanted to be made comfortable, but not to pursue aggressive interventions. They said she'd told them she was ready. Did she tell them that? Or did they tell you she told them that?" Patricia met my eyes then. In that moment, I saw confirmation of something terrible. She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any words could have been. I moved toward my mother's room without another word. My legs felt strange, disconnected from my body, like I was watching myself walk rather than actually walking. The hallway tiles were institutional beige, worn in the center from thousands of feet passing over them. Thousands of families having conversations like this one. Thousands of people reaching the end, and thousands of people deciding what that end should look like. My mother's room was small, A hospital bed, a chair, a television mounted on the wall that was always on but never watched. A window that looked out onto the parking lot. On the bedside table was a framed photograph of the four of us. Me, my mother, Callum, and Derek, from my mother's 70th birthday party 3 years ago. Everyone was smiling. Everyone looked healthy and whole, and like the future stretched out indefinitely ahead of us. I sat down in the visitor's chair and looked at my mother's face. She was still asleep, or pretending to be. Her breathing was steady but shallow. She'd been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer 8 months ago. The doctors had given her 6 months. She'd beaten that estimate by 2 months, which was either a testament to her stubbornness or a cruel joke about false hope. Either way, we were here, in this room, at this ending. "Mom," I said quietly, "I need to talk to you about something." She opened her eyes. They were cloudy now, not quite focused on me, but aware. She'd been in pain this morning. Patricia had adjusted her medication, and now she existed in that space between suffering and oblivion. It was probably better this way. It was definitely not what I wanted to think about. "Did you tell Callum and Derek that you want to die?" I asked. I wasn't gentle about it. I couldn't be. Gentleness would make it real in a different way, and I needed the truth more than I needed kindness right now. My mother's eyes focused slightly. Her hand moved on the bedspread, a small gesture that might have been reaching for me, or might have been nothing at all. "What?" Her voice was barely a whisper, roughened by pain medication and the general deterioration of a body shutting down. "The nurse said you told them you don't want to continue treatment. That you're ready to go. Did you say that?" My mother's eyes closed again. When she opened them, they were clearer, more present. "Viaya," she said. "Come here." I moved closer, leaning down so my ear was near her mouth. She smelled like hospital blankets and the lavender soap I'd brought from home. She'd always loved that soap. Even now, even like this, I could smell it. "I told them I was tired," she whispered. "I told them the pain was bad. I told them I didn't know if I could do this anymore. That's not the same as wanting to die." Something cold moved through my chest. Not shock exactly. Recognition. The kind of recognition that comes when you suddenly understand that people you've known your entire life are capable of things you didn't think they were capable of. The kind of recognition that changes everything. "What did they do with what you said?" I asked. "They talked about comfort care, about letting me rest, about making sure I wasn't suffering unnecessarily." My mother's eyes opened wider now. She was more present, pulling herself back from whatever medication-induced haze she'd been in. "But Viaya, they said it in a way that made it sound like they were asking me permission." "Permission for what?" "To let me go, to stop fighting, to accept that I'm dying, and maybe I should just accept it faster." I stood up. The room felt too small suddenly. The walls were closing in. The window showed only the parking lot, the same gray asphalt, the same rows of cars, the same endless nothing that people drove away from after visiting dying relatives. I wanted to smash through that window. I wanted to run. I wanted to call my sons and demand explanations. Instead, I stood there, my hands at my sides, my mind racing through the past weeks. Callum had visited 3 days ago. He'd brought flowers. He'd sat with my mother for an hour while I was in the cafeteria getting coffee. Derek had been here yesterday. He'd taken my mother's hand and told her he loved her. He'd said something about how he wanted her to be at peace. At the time, I'd thought it was sweet. Now it felt like something else entirely. Now it felt like a conspiracy wearing the mask of compassion. "I'm going to talk to them," I said. "Viaya, wait." My mother's voice was stronger now. "Fear will do that. Fear will pull someone back from the edge of medication and pain and push them into clarity. I don't want you to be angry with them." "How can I not be angry? They're manipulating your end-of-life decisions. They're telling medical professionals that you want to die when you haven't actually said that. They're scared," my mother interrupted. "They're watching me suffer, and they don't know how to help, so they're trying to control the only thing they think they can control. That doesn't make it right, but it makes it understandable. I don't care if it's understandable. I care that it's happening. I care that they're trying to rush you toward death so they don't have to watch you suffer anymore. So they don't have to feel guilty about not visiting more often. So they can go back to their lives and pretend this never happened." I was pacing now, my voice rising. A nurse stuck her head in to check if everything was okay. I waved her away. Everything was not okay. Everything was the opposite of okay. Everything was a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from because I was already awake, and this was reality. "Call them," my mother said. "But listen to them first, before you decide what this means. Promise me you'll listen." I promised, though I wasn't sure I meant it. I was too angry to mean anything right now. I was too betrayed. I was too horrified by what I was beginning to understand about my own family. That evening, after Patricia had given my mother her pain medication and she drifted off into medicated sleep, I sat in my car in the hospice parking lot and called Callum. He answered on the third ring, which meant he'd seen my name and decided to pick up anyway. That was something. That was proof that he knew something was wrong, that he knew I might be calling about this. "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice was careful, measured, the voice of someone preparing for a difficult conversation. "Did you tell the nurse that your grandmother wants to die?" I didn't see the point in preamble. I didn't see the point in anything except getting to the truth. There was silence on the other end of the line. I could hear traffic in the background. He was in his car, probably on his way home from work. Probably had no idea that his world was about to shift on its axis. "She's suffering," he said finally. "She's in pain. She told me she didn't want to keep fighting." I was just trying to make sure the medical team understood what she wanted. "That's not what she told me. She told me she said she was tired and in pain. She didn't say she wanted to die. Those are two very different things." "Mom, she's dying. We all know she's dying. The question is just how long we want to drag it out and make her suffer while it happens." The words hit me like a physical blow. "So you decided for her? You decided that suffering for a few more weeks or months is worse than dying sooner? You made that decision for her?" "That's not what I said." "That's exactly what you said. You told the medical team she wants to die so they'll stop treating her and she'll die faster. You're trying to speed up the process because you can't handle watching her suffer." "And what's wrong with that?" Callum's voice rose now. The careful measure was gone, replaced by anger and something else. Something that sounded like desperation. "What's wrong with wanting her to not be in pain? What's wrong with accepting that she's dying and trying to make that process as painless as possible?" "There's nothing wrong with that, but that's not what you're doing. You're not accepting anything. You're manipulating a dying woman into accepting death faster than she's ready for because it's easier for you. Because you don't have to visit as much. Because you don't have to feel guilty about not being here." "I visit," he said. "I'm there all the time." "You visit once every 2 weeks. You sit for an hour, and then you leave." Derek is here almost every day. I'm here every single day. And neither of us is trying to convince her to give up. There was silence again. Longer this time. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. I could hear the sound of his car, the hum of the engine, the faint sound of the radio. Normal sounds, everyday sounds, the sounds of a life that was continuing on while mine was falling apart. I'm going to talk to Derek, I said. And if either of you tries to influence your grandmother's end-of-life decisions again, I'm going to make sure everyone knows about it. The doctors, the nurses, the hospice administration, everyone. Do you understand? Mom, please. I hung up. I didn't want to hear his explanations. I didn't want to hear his justifications. I didn't want to understand why he'd done this because understanding would require empathy, and I didn't have any empathy left. All of it had been used up in the past 6 weeks, watching my mother deteriorate, holding her hand through pain, listening to her talk about her life and her regrets and her hopes that she'd leave something good behind. Derek answered his phone on the first ring. That was worse somehow. That meant he was waiting for my call. That meant he knew this was coming. I talked to Callum, I said without preamble. I figured you might, Derek replied. His voice was calm. Too calm. The calm of someone who had prepared for this conversation, who had rehearsed it in his mind, who had already decided what he was going to say and how he was going to defend himself. Did you tell the nurse that your grandmother wants to die? I told the nurse that Grandma had expressed that she was ready to let go, that she was tired of fighting, that she wanted to be comfortable rather than continue aggressive treatment. She didn't say that. She said she was tired and in pain. Those are not the same thing. Viaya, she's dying. She's in constant pain. She can't eat. She can't sleep without medication. She can barely move. What kind of life is this? What are we supposed to do? Keep her alive in agony for another month or two just so we can feel like we didn't give up? Yes, I said. Yes, exactly. Because it's not our decision to make. It's her decision, and you're taking that away from her by putting words in her mouth. By telling medical professionals that she wants to die when she hasn't actually said that. She has said it, Derek insisted. Not in those exact words, but she's said it. She's asked me how much longer she has to go through this. She's asked me if there's any way to make it stop. What am I supposed to do with that? Pretend she didn't say it? Pretend she's happy lying in that bed slowly disappearing? You're supposed to listen to what she actually says and report that accurately. You're not supposed to interpret her pain as a death wish. You're not supposed to help her die faster because it makes you feel better. That's not what this is about, Derek said, and now his voice cracked. There was emotion underneath the calm. Grief and guilt and desperation all mixed together. This is about me not wanting to watch her suffer anymore. This is about me not being able to sit in that room and listen to her cry in pain and feel like I'm just sitting there doing nothing. This is about me wanting to help her. You're not helping her. You're helping yourself. You're making her death about your comfort instead of hers. I hung up before he could respond. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the hospice facility and I cried. Not delicate tears. Not quiet tears. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere primal inside me. The kind of crying that comes when everything you thought you knew about your family turns out to be a lie. The kind of crying that comes when you realize that love and betrayal are not opposites, but can exist in the same moment, in the same person, tangled up together so completely that you can't separate them. After an hour, maybe more, I got out of the car and went back inside. The night shift was starting. Patricia was still there, finishing up her paperwork before handing over to the evening nurses. She saw me, and her expression changed. She knew. She'd known from the moment I asked her that question in the hallway. She'd known that this family was fracturing right in front of her. "I need to speak with the hospice director," I told her. "It's late," she said gently. "But I can call her. She's on call tonight." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in a small office with Dr. Helena Reeves, the medical director of the hospice facility. She was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and kind eyes that had probably seen every version of family dysfunction and medical ethics violation that existed. She listened to my story without interrupting. She listened to my explanation of what my mother had actually said versus what my sons had reported. She listened to my fear that they were trying to manipulate her death. "I understand your concerns," Dr. Reeves said when I finished, "and I want to assure you that we take end-of-life decision-making very seriously. However, I need to be honest with you. Your mother is dying. The cancer has progressed to a point where her organs are beginning to fail. She has perhaps 2 to 3 weeks left, possibly less. In that time, she will experience increasing pain and decreasing quality of life." "I know that," I said. "But that's not the same as her wanting to die right now. That's not the same as her wanting to give up." "No, it's not. But I do want to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. If your mother told you that she wanted to die, that she couldn't bear the pain anymore, that she was ready to let go, would you honor that wish?" I opened my mouth to say yes. The word was right there, but it caught in my throat. Because the truth was more complicated. The truth was that I didn't know. The truth was that I wanted my mother to live forever, even if forever meant she was in pain, even if forever meant she was suffering. Because the alternative was a world without her, and I wasn't ready for that world. I would never be ready for that world. "I don't know," I admitted. "That's honest," Dr. Reeves said. "And it's important, because what your sons are doing, whether they're doing it consciously or unconsciously, is trying to resolve their own pain about her dying. They're trying to make it easier for themselves by making it happen faster. But that's a natural response. That's human. It doesn't make them monsters. It makes them scared." "But they're lying." "They're telling you she wants to die when she hasn't said that. They're interpreting what she said in a way that aligns with their own needs. And yes, that's problematic from an ethical standpoint. But it's also something we see constantly in hospice care. Families struggling with the dying process and trying to control it in whatever way they can. So, what do? You advocate for your mother. You make sure her voice is heard clearly. You document what she actually wants. And you do that not by fighting with your sons, but by having a conversation with your mother about what she wants, and then making sure that's communicated clearly to the medical team." That night, I sat with my mother through the entire evening shift. She was awake more than she'd been in days. The pain medication had been adjusted, and she existed in that sweet spot where she was conscious, but not suffering. We talked about her life. We talked about my father, who'd passed away 15 years ago. We talked about my childhood. We talked about everything except the thing we needed to talk about. Finally, as midnight approached and the hospital grew quiet, I asked her directly, "Mom, if you could choose right now, what would you want? Not what you think I want to hear. Not what you think is best for everyone else. What would you actually want?" She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I thought she'd fallen asleep. But then she opened her eyes and looked at me. "I want more time," she said. even if it hurts, even if it's hard. I'm not ready to go yet. There are things I still want to say to you. Things I need you to know before I'm gone." "Okay," I said. "Then that's what we're going to do. We're going to give you more time, and you're going to tell me everything." Over the next 2 weeks, my mother told me things. She told me about her marriage to my father, about the hard times and the good times, and the way she'd learned to love him more as they grew older. She told me about her regrets. She told me about her hopes for me and for my sons. She told me about the person she'd wanted to be and the person she'd actually become. She told me that she was afraid of dying, but more afraid of leaving things unsaid. And I called my sons. Not to fight with them, but to tell them what their grandmother had said. To tell them that she wanted more time. To tell them that we were going to give her that time, and they could either be part of it or they could stay away. But we were not going to rush her toward death. Callum didn't visit again until the final week. Derek came every day. He cried. He held my mother's hand. He told her he was sorry for trying to control her ending. He told her he loved her. And she told him she forgave him, because mothers do that. Because even when our children hurt us, we find a way to forgive them because they're still our children and we still love them. My mother passed away on a Tuesday morning in early spring. The sun was coming through the window. The birds were singing in the trees outside. It was peaceful and quiet and exactly the way she would have wanted it. She went in her own time, on her own terms, with her daughter holding her hand and her grandsons in the waiting room. After she was gone, after the nurses had come and done what they needed to do, I sat alone with her body for a long time. I thought about the weeks before, about the conspiracy of good intentions, about the way love and fear can twist together and become something unrecognizable. I thought about my sons and their desperation to make the suffering stop. I thought about my mother and her need to live fully right up until the moment she died. I called Callum and Derek and asked them to come in. We sat together in that small room with our mother's body, and we talked. Really talked. Not about who was right or wrong, but about what had happened and why. Callum cried. Derek cried. I cried. We talked about how hard it is to watch someone you love deteriorate. We talked about the guilt of not being able to fix it. We talked about the fear of being left behind. "I'm sorry," Callum said, "for trying to make it about what I needed instead of what she needed." "I'm sorry too," Derek added, "for interpreting her pain as a death wish, for not listening to what she was actually saying." "I'm sorry for being angry," I said, "for not understanding that you were scared." We didn't fix everything that day. We didn't erase what had happened or pretend it hadn't mattered. But we began the process of rebuilding trust. We began the process of understanding that we were all just people trying to navigate an impossible situation. And sometimes we did it badly. And sometimes we hurt each other in the process. But that didn't mean we didn't love each other. In the months that followed, I learned some important things. I learned that end-of-life care is complicated and messy and rarely black and white. I learned that families are complicated and messy and rarely black and white. I learned that sometimes the people we love most are also the people who can hurt us most deeply, often without meaning to. I learned that forgiveness is not about condoning what happened, but about choosing to move forward anyway. I also learned to speak up. I learned that when something feels wrong, it probably is, and that it's worth investigating. I learned that my mother's voice mattered more than anyone else's interpretation of her voice. I learned that advocacy is not a luxury, it's a necessity, especially when someone you love is vulnerable. A year after my mother's death, I started volunteering at the hospice facility. I work with families going through end-of-life decisions, helping them navigate the complicated terrain of medical ethics and family dynamics. I help them ask the hard questions. I help them listen to what their loved ones are actually saying versus what they're projecting onto them. I help them find the balance between compassion and control. Derek visits me every Sunday. We have lunch together, and we talk about our lives. The conversation doesn't always come easily, but it comes. Callum calls once a week. We're rebuilding our relationship slowly, carefully, with the understanding that what happened was real and it mattered. But it doesn't have to define us. And sometimes, when I'm sitting with a family in a hospice room and I see them struggling with the same questions we struggled with, I tell them my story. I tell them about the conspiracy of good intentions. I tell them about how easy it is to mistake your own needs for someone else's needs. I tell them about my mother and her final weeks and how precious they turned out to be, even though they were painful and hard and nothing like what we thought they would be. I tell them that the dying deserve to be heard, that their voice matters, that sometimes the greatest gift we can give our loved ones is not to fix their suffering, but to witness it with them and let them choose their own ending, whatever that looks like. If you're caring for someone at the end of life, please listen to what they're actually saying, not what you're hoping they'll say.